Hello and welcome to the DisruptAbility podcast presented by Inclusive Cork. Today's interview is with Stephen Ryan, who is the founder of Narration and 24 Stories. Stephen's educational experience started in the Cork Spastic Clinic, and he is now a lecturer in digital marketing in the Cork Institute of Technology. Stephen is a storyteller, and this is a great story. Sit back and enjoy, and thank you for listening. So today, it's my great privilege to have Stephen Ryan here talking to us today about disability. I met Stephen back in January.
That's right.
In the Republic of Cork, which is based in the Republic of Cork.
Yeah.
And I heard your story and it blew me away. And at the end of the talk, I went up and I said, Stephen, I want to talk to you, man, about coming on a podcast with me. And you've been very kind to me because I'm a startup and you have given me loads of opportunities in the digital marketing.
Which I think is important. Everyone needs a hand when they're starting off.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah.
And I think we won't progress as a society unless we all help each other as well. So that's my thing. And I think you're doing something good as well with not just this podcast, but in general for businesses. So I brought you into CIT.
That's right.
And I brought you into a startup talking 24 Stories as well, where you got some honest feedback, which sometimes can be good as well.
I certainly did.
So you got a bit of a grilling, but look, these things happen, but I think you learn from those things as well.
No, absolutely. And in CIT, one of the students gave me my own hashtag.
That's
Employ
right.
the people you serve, and I've been using it since.
Yeah.
So, you get something from everything you do. So
I'm a big believer in that. I've said that. I say it to everyone, look, if you can learn one thing, even if you go to a conference for a whole day and if there's one thing new that you've learned, then it's worth it. If you go to a meeting, there's one new thing you have, because every day should be about taking one new thing on. And sometimes that new thing is much bigger than maybe all the other new things you've learned recently, but it's all a part of a bigger jigsaw that you'll find as the business grows as well, that you'll find that from your starting point to maybe a few months on and a couple of years on, hopefully, that it will completely change because of all those points as well, because you'll see that different things happen.
Yeah, no, it's a work in progress, but it's getting there, and I'm meeting amazing people who are very supportive and really believe in diversity and inclusion and want to do something around it.
Yep.
So I think you have a story to tell.
Yeah.
That is a very interesting story, and I think it's a very powerful story.
Yeah.
And you are what I would call an accessible role model, especially for young people who can see that someone with a disability can succeed in the education system and can succeed in the business world. And I think that is really important for us to talk about that. Yeah. Because maybe we didn't have that when we were growing up.
No. In some ways, I think what has happened is, you see, there's good and bad parts to social media and to the online world. But one of the good plus points is that it's given probably smaller niches a bit of a voice now that maybe wasn't heard before, or people are getting discovered, or you can follow the right people and all of that type of stuff. So, and I think that's one of the reasons that when I suppose this time last year, I made the bold and maybe crazy decision to do something for myself and go on a startup journey. Luckily for me, I had the backup of CIT because I've been lecturing there for 5 years as well. But I said I wanted to do something for myself, and I always had this idea in my head that whenever I did do something for myself, I was going to tell my story. Okay. Because I felt that was the opportunity. Yeah. And I wanted to tell it for a number of reasons. In some ways, it's like nearly therapy for yourself. Yeah. Because the secret is out of the bag. Yeah. The second one, I said, wouldn't it be great that I could help somebody else, another organisation? And I suppose the third one was, could I inspire possibly younger people? Yeah. Because when I think back, just like you said a while ago, when maybe I was leaving school and I was going into maybe third level, I couldn't think of anyone that could have been a bit like me. Yeah. And therefore, you're kind of saying, am I destined to succeed at all? Because there's no one out there that's doing that. Yeah. So I suppose they were the big things. So I suppose last June, for those of you listening, that don't know me, I just give you a small bit of my kind of professional background. I was head of marketing for Red FM for the last 2.5 years, up until June last year, and previous to that I would have been the head of marketing of Ford Wildlife Park for 7.5 years, and I had built a bit of a reputation in Cork for being very active on social. On Twitter I'd be known as marketing in Cork, and that would have gone back 10 years ago, and I suppose in my own mind I was building my own personal brand for years. I had made a decision early on that I was going to not sit behind a brand, even though they were very, very big and famous brands in the city, that I was going to come out from behind that and also have my own brand. And luckily for me, building that over time led to me lecturing. So when they started to introduce digital marketing in CIT, I was one of the first people that they asked would I be interested in going for it.
Brilliant.
And led that course, which ended up being a master's. So I suppose I said, I built this brand, but now there's a different aspect to my story that I've never told. So I said, this is a perfect opportunity. So when I left Red in June last year, I said, I'm not going to rush straight into launching this. I'm going to give myself time. So I met a lot of different people. I had probably more coffees than anyone could ever need in their lifetime. But from July, August, September, and I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch my new business with a new brand name. I'm going to launch it in probably the end of September, start of October. And it was the start of October I launched it in. So I said, first of all, I want the brand to reflect me, and I want the brand to reflect something to do with me as well. So there was going to be two sides to it. So one of it is actually, I suppose, is 24 Stories, which is a network for people, and we can probably talk about that later on. But I also wanted to give back as well, and that's why the startup story. But the other side of it was probably me, the personal brand, and it was about bringing my expertise to lots of different businesses. And I was there for a long time, and I was saying, what would I call it? And I was going to call it Stephen Ryan Consultancy. Had spoke to a few people, and they said, no, but if you ever get bigger, it's not nice for everyone else in the organisation to be working underneath someone else's name. And I said, you know what, actually that makes complete sense. Yeah. Right. Even for example, if as I grow older, my own two kids have already suggested, can we take over the business in 2018? But anyway, and I said, they'd want to be big first before you do that. I said, yeah, it makes sense to call it something generic, that it's not just about me, it's about something bigger. So I played around with this names for ages, and I was sitting at a meeting actually. I've actually never told this part of the story before. I was sitting at an event in Dublin last year, and nobody knew that I was leaving at this point, and it was a radio conference, and I think it was April, and I was in the Aviva, and I was sitting there, and one of the speakers was talking about, and this is how it's, the story has been narrated over time, and something triggered, and I just said, hold on a second, that's an interesting name. So of course I went home, looked up what websites were available, saw the narrator had gone, all of these, and I had remembered in a previous life, and still do the odd bit every now and again, I'm a trained tenor as well, an operatic tenor. I had performed in a show in the Everyman Palace in Joseph and Technicolor Dreamcoat. My role was the narrator, and when I thought back to that role, I said, okay, that role was about, you were nearly invisible on stage, all these characters are doing the performance and you're telling the story, which is kind of weird in a show, that you're on the stage but they don't see you but you see them. And I said, but in some ways that's what, marketing tells the story for businesses. So I said, I like that name. And so I fooled around, I looked through the dictionaries, is there any other kind of versions of that? And then I saw that the word narration was free. And narration was about narrating a series of events, so it's the narrate over time, so it's not just one particular moment, it's more like the longevity of it. So I said, actually I like that. So I said, yeah, that's really good, I'm going to take that. So that was in April, and then I was saying, okay, I need to brand this a bit better now as time goes on. So I handed in my notice, and at this point nobody knew what my company was going to be called. I wasn't going to launch it until later in the year, and I then started fooling around this idea. I said, what am I going to what's it going to look like? And I always had this idea that I wanted to reflect so that on something that was personal to me and the condition. So I was inside in Dundrum Shopping Centre, and I walked into I don't know, we were looking at clothes. I think we were in Fat Face, that clothing shop, and I noticed that they had there was just a bit of jewellery section or whatever, and I noticed that there was one that had a wishbone, but it was turned upside down. And I said, that looks like an N. And I said, I like that. And I said, that's the start of my story. That wishbone can be an N, and now I can tell the story. So I waited till the launch, and I got all these logos with the N, the narration logo, it's a wishbone. Yeah. But a lot of people didn't realise what it was. So I actually, in the summer, when I launched, I had this. When I first said I'm leaving Red FM and stuff like that, I had just a wishbone, see, small little wishbone, put that out there. Yeah. And people didn't know what it was. Some people didn't even guess what it did. They were like, oh, one person, I think, it was about 100 people commented on LinkedIn, 200 people commented on a LinkedIn post, and one person said, I like the wishbone. Some other people says they thought it was a helmet or something. They couldn't figure out what it was, because it was styled in a certain way. So I said, ready for the next chapter. That's what I put on it. Right. So I had a series of books, and I had Red FM. I actually had previously worked with Cork City. I had a CIT book, a Red FM book, and then this one, that's the next chapter with this wishbone on the front, and that was it. Right. And then the following week, I was doing a bit of freelance consultancy under my own name for the time being. I didn't have any brand or anything, no website, and I just said, off to a great start. I had done training with Cork City Council and a few other things, and I said, let the story begin. And but the N was wishbone again. So people didn't. A few started to cop that it was an N, but they left it at that. Then it went quiet. I started telling them, my journey of being a startup and all of that. But I said I invited people then to a launch and again going back, because I'm always about connecting joining the dots and bringing that theatre side in. I said, okay, I remember when I was about 6, my first appearance on stage was in Father Matthew Hall. Right. So I said, doing the Fesh Matthew, I said, I wonder, can you hire that place? So I contacted them. They said, yeah, no problem. Nobody ever asked them, because they said you can't have drink in there. I said, look, all I want to do is tea and coffee. They said, yeah, no problem, because it's a temperance hall, so you're not allowed any alcohol in the place. So I said, no, that's fine. I said I want to do a launch, so picked a date. And then, so I sent out an invite to people with the launch of, I would like to invite you to the launch of my new business, where I'll be telling my story, but I will also be launching an initiative with Enable Ireland. So people then were saying, what's this about? Right. Seemed to make no sense.
And nobody at this stage had made the connection between the wishbone and...
Absolutely not.
Alright, yeah.
So I'm a big man about teasing things up. I've always said that. Don't be rushing into stuff over the years. I've done it with photo and red and stuff like that. Yeah. Always tease it, because people are anticipating it. So on the 4th of October last year, then I was lucky. About 100 people turned up to the launch inside in Father Matthew Hall, and I gave a bit of a spiel at the start or whatever about marketing and stuff like that, and then I said, I'd like to unveil the name of my new company. Welcome to Narration, and the logo up on the screen. I said, you might notice that the N is a bit different to the rest of the letters, and I said it resembles a wishbone. And I went on to another slide and I said, well, the wishbone represents me, because like a wishbone, I break easy. And I said, that's the story I want to tell you tonight. So I said, what a lot of people don't realise is they know Stephen the marketeer, but they mightn't know Stephen the kid that suffered with osteogenesis imperfecta. And I said, I started my life here, and I showed a picture of the Cork Spastic Clinic, because that's what it was called when I went there. So at 3 years of age, I went to preschool there, and I stayed there till I was about 7. I made my first Holy Communion there. And I said, from the minute I was born, I had this condition, which means my bones break quite easily. I've had over 50 breaks in my life, possibly a lot more than that. You don't count all of them. So some, and plus you don't count in each individual. You kind of count it in stages. So you'd say, oh, I've done it now once, and then the next time it happens. But you could have done 3 or 4 when the first one happens. So I said, I suppose I told that story. So having started there, I started in a very different environment to possibly most people. I suppose in some ways, it's used as a kind of a term now to kind of mock people in some ways. And which is why they changed the name over time. To
language has changed over time. Language is huge, isn't it?
Originally it wouldn't have been, but no, but it was a place where you got sympathy. That's your small fella goes to the spastic clinic. That kind of way.
There's a lot of tragedy surrounding it, wasn't it? Yeah.
So, and that happens a lot with disability. Actually, we always tend to look at the kind of the negative side of it, which of course there is negative sides of it. Don't get me wrong. It's not all rosy in the garden, and it can be a struggle as a kid when you're constantly faced with, you don't know what the next break is or whatever. So I suppose what I was trying to get across was I had started there, but I was very lucky that I had teachers down there who saw this ambitious child, I presume, and very early on knew that I was progressing at a rapid rate. Because you have to think back to a time when there was no SNAs, there was no, schools didn't know how to cope with kids with special needs. And if there was a child that was going to be breaking a lot, they would run a mile. So my parents were looking for a place that would support, and the only obvious place that was suggested was there at the time.
And did you get the equivalent of education in the Cork Spastic Clinic as you would have got in a mainstream school, or do you think it wasn't at the same standard?
You see,
at that time,
I'd say they were trying their best. But it was mixed classes. So I remember bits. Yourself when you're a kid, you remember bits. I remember being in a class and I was teaching a boy in 6th class his maths.
Okay. And how old were you?
I was only 7, he was 11 or 12. So I'd say the level was all over the place.
All right. So mixed ability.
And it's a mixed ability. They were trying their best, but I think, you see, in time they realised, hold on a second, what we're really trying to teach here is people with mental disabilities. What are the people with physical disabilities doing here? Because we're holding them back in some ways, whereas we need to help the people that have intellectual problems, because there's a struggle there, a genuine struggle to read, to write, to do maths and stuff like that. Whereas somebody like me, it was the physical nature. Once I was sat down on a seat, nothing was going to really happen to me as such. I get on with my work. Yes, I'd suffer from fatigue and stuff like that, but upstairs there was nothing.
See, and this is it. And what often happens is when people see something physical, they assume wrongly that there's something intellectual as well. And they don't always go hand in hand.
They don't always
and
go
that's
hand in
why
hand.
disability is so complex, and that's why we're doing this and we're talking about it now, so that people
extremely complex
get their head around it.
So I went there, and I went up as far as 2nd class, but I think I made my communion when I was 6 going on 7, so I made it quite young, because I think I went into school quite young as well. But the teachers said to my parents, look, we need to try and get them into mainstream school. We're kind of holding them back. So they talked. I used to get transport to school. I used to go in a van. When you think about stigmas and stuff, I used to go in a van in school with Cork Spastic Clinic written on the top of it,
Right.
I suppose as a kid you don't kind of notice these things. But thinking back, like, you know, and it was great for me in some ways, because I grew up with people with all various backgrounds, various disabilities. So I was probably ahead of the game in terms of inclusion. I knew what inclusion was when no one else probably did, because no two people were the same. They all suffer from different things. And so they eventually got a school. I'm originally from Farnry, so Scully gone. So I went up there, and I think they put me back into second class, because I had that year where I wasn't that old, so I had the opportunity to go to do second class again, do it properly. But straight away, even though I had come from the spastic, straight away I remember they were surprised in the school that within a matter of weeks there was a maths test one day, and there was 45 questions. There was one person in the class got them all right, and it happened to be me.
Right.
So I think it surprised them that a child had come from this, and I was consistently in the top performing in the class, but still they struggled with how to deal with me. I don't think they truly understood what do we do here. So much so that I had an operation, and I told this in the story. I missed the whole of 4th class because I went through a stage where I had an operation. I was constantly going over on my knees. I suffered from very bad fallen arches, so they wanted to see could they amend it, and they took a piece of bone out of my hip and put it into my ankle to try and support it. I was 9 going on 10 at the time, so I was 3rd class, actually going into 4th class. Went in, I was in cast for 4 months, and I often say this is the dangerous time. So when you're approaching kind of adolescence, when you're getting to that stage, the paranoia sits in.
Okay.
It's there. I think when you're younger, I was breaking stuff, getting out of cast and going back into cast. I don't think the fear wasn't in me as much as I got older. So I was in the cast for 4 months. When I came out of it, I had a mental block. Complete mental block.
Right.
Didn't know how to walk. No. Looking back, they tried everything. Brain scans, CAT scans, all that type of stuff. Put me through intensive physio. No. The doctor, actually, the orthopedic surgeon, Dr. McGuinness at the time, he was terrified. He had thought he had messed things up completely. He didn't know. Couldn't figure out what happened to me. So I ended up in a wheelchair, because I just couldn't walk. Couldn't even walk with crutches. Just mental block. But I think I had built up a fear that it's going to fall again.
You're going to fall again.
So I had spent 4 months where I didn't break anything because I was in a cast and I was held up. So I was saying it was a sense of security. So I don't know whether that had set in and played. So So we're talking about inclusion then, and my class were upstairs in the primary school. So it was a 2-floor primary school, no lifts. Like,
of course not. Yeah.
This is Ireland in the 1980s, going into the 1990s. There was no lifts. So, and they wouldn't bring the class downstairs. So I ended up not going to school for the whole of 4th class.
Right.
And luckily for me, Mr. Fitzgibbon, he was he was a teacher in the school, but he actually got some hours to come and kind of maybe do 3 or 4 hours a week in the house. The department, I think, paid for it.
Oh, right. Bit of home tutoring. Okay.
So it kind of kept me going. Then I got back on my feet and I got back into 5th class, but actually I had to move class to go back to school because my old class still were upstairs, but there was a different class downstairs.
Right.
So I had to go into a different class into 5th class. So that was fine. Went back. It looked like I was kind of getting back again. Had a couple of setbacks, broke my arms and legs and stuff a few more times, and then I had a very bad break just before I was making my confirmation in 6th class in March. I literally, all I did was at home. I was supposed to actually have an appointment in the regional at the time, no, the CUH, and knelt down and broke my femur, and just from kneeling down. But I think there had been an underlying problem there for a while, and whatever happened, it snapped.
Right, Stephen, when I'm listening to this,
Yeah.
I'm hearing pain.
Oh yeah.
You must have, like, as a
vicious
young
pain, yeah.
person, as a child, you must have been in so much pain.
That was the worst. When I think
Yeah.
back over the time, that was the worst.
Yeah.
My poor mother, I nearly bit her. I think I was 12, in the ambulance, going to the hospital.
Yeah.
Pain was vicious. It was really, really bad. I ended up in hospital that time then, because the way they treated it, they put you up on traction. I ended up in there for 8 weeks. I stayed there for 8 weeks in the old orthopaedic hospital above, and when I came out, it was kind of nearly back to square one again. This time I was walking, but with the aid of crutches. And I had to make my confirmation with a different school, because I was in hospital. They couldn't do anything about it, so I made it with a different school, and I came out the end of May or something like that. And of course I didn't finish off school with my old class. I wasn't able to, and then it was time to prepare for secondary school. My parents had looked around at the time, and they wanted a school that kind of could really cope me, because if I think back in primary school as well, I never got to do, so I didn't go on any school tours. They wouldn't take the risk.
Right.
They would have brought me to like the sports day, but I just sat at the side, and that's fair enough. I could understand bits of that.
Did you have friends?
I had friends. Sometimes the ones that you didn't think we were friends would be the ones that surprised me. I always remember I was in hospital for 8 weeks, and there was a young guy in my class, and I wouldn't have been that close to him. I used to call in nearly every day because he lived around the corner. And that kind of surprised me,
Brilliant.
So there's always those kind of little, people, they're just, they're kind, they're good natured.
Yeah, the people you don't expect will support you. And
like when I think back then, I wanted to go into a quiz team, I wanted to go into the school band. There was always an excuse why I didn't make it in. I remember being the 26th out of 25 got in, and I was down to the last 2, and I didn't get in.
They were scared of you.
I think they just didn't want to take. It was different times.
Yeah.
I'd hope.
I hope it's different times.
I hope
I'm sorry that sometimes I do hear stories where inclusion doesn't happen.
I can see it all the time. So I suppose then at that point we wanted to look for a secondary school, and I remember going into Farm Forest College, and one of the first questions does he play GA?
Oh.
My parents was like, they don't get this at all. No, he doesn't. He can't play a sport. I couldn't play any contact sport, just was never an option. It was never going to be there.
All right.
And then they started bringing up other questions like that. Something similar happened with the man.
All right.
So they were saying, forget this. We need to go to a school where kids are looked after with disabilities. So I went to up to Mayfield Community School.
Okay.
They had a nurse up there. They had a reputation. Everything was on the flat.
Yes.
They had a reputation for really caring for kids with disabilities. So kids had come from other parts of the city to go up there as well. They're one of the rare few schools in Cork that really they were setting a precedent in terms of where we're going to be leaders in this area.
Brilliant.
So went up there, and in fairness, school was very good to me. I have to say that. I look probably back a lot more fondly of that school than Scully's Sagan. I think they were just that bit better from day one. And the vice principal, Mr. Mackey, was a very good guy. Always, looking out for me. And went in there, but again, I went into a school again. But I was used to it at this stage. I went into school, I knew nobody. Because I had to come out of my own area, so I went into knew nobody. And I was on crutches, and I ended up on crutches for the first 2 years. And there was actually, I remember, lads when we got older taught me, but there was 2 fellas had a bet, and they had a bet between them. They said that one said I would always be on crutches, and the other said no, he won't be. They had a bet, and they taught me this year. They were laughing one night. I think it was when we were kind of 18, 19, when we were, had a few drinks on board or whatever. They were telling me this, And I thought, looking back, it was kind of funny that that's what their thought process was. But I remember, so I was on crutches, so it was a bit of a struggle now to try and bring a bag around. And I remember the teacher, the class teacher that we had in first year, she said, look, would anybody be willing to help Stephen here? He can't, he's in crutches and stuff like that. And there was this young guy put his hand up and said, I'll do it. David's his name. And he did it for about 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
Incredible. We're still friends. And I didn't know him before that, but like it says a lot about a guy when he does something like that. Yeah. So yeah, I went through secondary school. Fine, probably a lot easier. I still had the odd break, but you see, with the condition, your worst period is kind of 10 to 15.
Okay. That's
the worst part. After that, it gets easier.
Okay.
It's as your bones are growing, you're going through puberty, all that kind of stuff. Once you're past that, it eases off.
Okay, it's kind of more solid. Your skeleton is getting stronger.
You're formed at this point as such. You're still very vulnerable, so you won't be going skiing or anything like that anytime soon. But so I suppose it became easier. But everyone knew in the school what I suffered from. They would have been very, very aware. And then I went into college, and I kind of went into college, and for some reason, I stopped telling people.
Okay.
And I first went to Tralee. Again, I put a lot of stumbling blocks in my own way too over the years.
Yeah.
I probably should have studied harder for the Leaving Cert. I got distracted. I got into singing when I was kind of 16 and found a hobby. So when everyone else had sport, I'd gone into musical theatre and found it quite late. I wouldn't say late in life, but I found it as a late teen and got this passion and wanted to do all the shows, and I was doing that while I should have been studying.
I don't agree. I think you need to, for your own mental
it's
health.
All worked out anyway.
It all works out.
It all works out. Yeah. So I ended up in Tralee first. Luckily for me, I got back to CIT. In second year, I was able to transfer across because it was the exact same course. So I got back, and then it was funny because then I missed out going into third year by about. I didn't fail anything, but I missed out that back then it wasn't straight degrees at all. It was sort diploma degree. That was kind of the way it worked. And I missed out by something like 2%, so I got 53 instead of 55.
Yeah.
I was devastated. I remember I was like, what am I going to do now? Because I was very adamant that I had to succeed. I couldn't do a labouring job or anything like that because I just physically wouldn't be able. And I didn't want to be stocking shelves or anything like that because I would be tired.
You needed a desk.
I needed something that I had to use my mind more than anything else.
And I think that's very important for people with disabilities, isn't it?
That they understand that early, Yeah,
take ownership of what it is and then
control the journey in some ways.
Design what will suit your life.
You take up the subjects. Even though in secondary school we would have all had a chance to do woodwork and engineering and all that, I dropped a lot of them fairly quick. I picked art. And I was comfortable with art. And it was creative and stuff like that. And in hindsight, I was too late, but I should have done music. I would have done very well in it, which is a pity. But so I suppose came back to CIT, but as I said, I missed out. But I spoke to career guidance out there, and I said, "Is there any way that I can carry on?" They said, "You can go at night time." So then I was faced with my first thing of, no, I have to go into work.
Right.
So what do I do now? So for years, I suppose I had disability allowance and stuff like that for a while, and that was great because it is great because it's quite hard with a condition. And I think some people don't realise that, but it's hard to get a part-time job because what happens if you break something or
it's very difficult.
It's hard enough to be young and get a part-time job anyway, but it's even 10 times harder probably in some ways when you have a condition because you're afraid if something happens to me, then they're going to probably let me go because they can, because you don't have a contract. So it was my first I remember first going into, I did a call centre or whatever, but my first proper job then, I suppose I was admin kind of customer service role, with a galvanising company of all places. I know my mother was quite fearful when I went in there. She was thinking, he's going into a steel industry type job. No, I was in the office, but there was times I had to go outside and deal with stuff. And I remember having to lift plates one day, and again, of course, me being trying to keep all this under wraps, like I didn't want to say, because I said if I had said that in an interview, there's not a hope I would have gotten the job.
I know.
So I said nothing, and spent 2.5 years there, and went from one job to the next, and never again. Every time I said nothing. And it was funny because I got a very bad accident. I fell down. I had broke my scapula when I was about 26, 27, and it was the first bad one I've had in years. I had kind of smaller things, and then I ended up 2 weeks later. It's typical. Nothing comes on, so you're waiting for a bus, and then it happens. A couple of things happen together. I lost my balance on the stairs and went over on my ankle. So I ended up in a wheelchair again. It was the first time in a while. No, only this time, thankfully, only for about 8 weeks. But as I was coming over, I was in crutches, and I went for an interview. For a job, and of all places, it was Cork City Football Club. So despite never played football, I was a big fan.
Yeah.
So it was just one of those things, and just told them that I dislocated my ankle. Never said that I had a condition.
Right.
Just said I dislocated my ankle.
Yeah.
And got the job. Went into that job, and for a while I was, on crutches and stuff like that. Then got off the crutches, and I was fine afterwards. And I was saying, so I never told them. Never said anything. Went to photo. Again, never said anything.
Yeah.
And I think as time went on in photo, something had happened, and I kind of said it, but not the full story. Because I was comfortable. I was there for about 5 years. I felt comfortable now that I could talk about something, but didn't kind of give the full story.
Yeah.
And I suppose I was always, I was given a talk. Enable Ireland brought me back to do a talk for their ball last year. And I said, in some ways, it's an invisible condition.
Yeah.
And you're afraid to talk about it. But I said, I still live with a fear. And I live with a fear of wet leaves on the floor. If I'm walking down the street and there's a drain, a manhole cover, I walk around it.
Yeah.
Up an embankment. I will go the longer way than try and take a shortcut. And people are looking, what's he doing? And I've always been like that. And
you see the danger to your body.
But then
that someone else doesn't have.
When I taught last year, I go back when I was still at Red, and I was afraid to say it, but I kind of said nothing. Storm Emma came, and that's my worst fear.
Storms.
Ice. Snow.
Right.
Ice, I couldn't think of anything worse. Because my balance isn't great anyway. If I go down, I'm in trouble. I know I can't fall. So you will see me perform nearly acrobats rather than me going hitting the ground. So if I lose my balance, I will try everything to keep myself up. I'm like a giraffe or something trying to fall or something. It's really funny. So when that happened last year, I was living in a house where there was actually steep hill, but I remember thinking, I can't go because even just getting to the car is a problem here. And then what happens if my car gets stuck in the ice? If I try to get out of the car, where do I go then? So all these different things are going through my mind. So I just said I'm stuck. And of course I'm fearful. Then everyone's going to be saying, well, he's exaggerating, he's doing it. All these things are running through my mind.
I know, paranoia, really, worrying about what other people are, and they all have their own things anyway.
And there's probably plenty of people stuck, and there's nothing wrong with them, but in my own mind, I'm building up all this anxiety, and this had happened over the years. I would have been always late for work if there was ever an icy morning. I would have waited. So, I suppose when I was able to tell my story then, I felt this huge sense of relief. That I know can explain. And even sometimes I still find that if it's a new person, that I still don't tell them. Because sometimes I think in your own mind, you're like, do we really want to go down telling this big story again?
But there's no need either.
Yeah.
You know,
You kinda
that's what, like,
yeah.
we're not just,
No.
like, we're not one-dimensional, Stephen. There's
no.
a lot more to us than our disability. And if there isn't a need to say it, then...
That's it, yeah.
I mean, who discloses their medical conditions to anyone on a first date?
Yeah.
You know?
It's, yeah, so
it's not necessary.
There's no need for it. So it does, look, it has a huge role to play in our lives.
Yes.
But there's also days we don't think about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's been plenty of days in my own mind that sometimes I forget.
Mm-hmm.
But subconsciously you never forget.
It's part of you.
So
it's part of who you are.
So I always say in some ways it's probably harder for people that get a disability late in life. Like, I'm thinking of people, elderly and stuff, that they get it because they've been so mobile and active all their life, and then all of a sudden this thing is thrown on them. Than somebody that got it maybe when they're younger, because when you're younger, you don't know any different. It's always been like this.
Yeah, most people acquire them. That's what they say.
Yeah, they do,
most people acquire it between the ages of 18 and 64 at working age. That's when you're most likely to acquire a disability.
My like you were talking about pain a while ago, my pain threshold will be very high. Mm-hmm. So I remember when I dislocated my ankle that time, I was inside in the hospital. The nurse didn't believe me that I had a dislocated ankle. She said, "You don't look like you're in pain." Like, but I said, "I know how to control it, because this is not the first time it's happened. So I know if I sit still, if I don't move, there's no pain." Mm-hmm. See, some people wouldn't know, and some people would even try to walk on something. Yeah. Which is a disaster. It is an awful thing to do. But if you're not used to it, you're going to make those mistakes. Whereas if someone that has been trained in their mind and trained themselves over time, you know how to avoid things. Yeah.
You manage it. Yeah. You know how to manage.
You know how to manage.
Right.
But even a small fall, like even to this day, I remember last year it was sports day in my daughter's school, and again I walked up. It was like a little grassy embankment, and I walked up. And then I slipped. No, I was fine. But I could have really done with a whiskey or something after it because I was shaking so bad. Okay. And then the embarrassment of falling. Yeah. And possibly nobody's looking at you. Yeah, but all these things are running through your mind. Yeah.
You feel vulnerable.
So you do feel vulnerable.
Sometimes you're vulnerable.
And I think that's the one thing that people don't understand. There is that vulnerability that's always there. Yes. There's that paranoia. And it's very hard to explain that to people. Yeah. And I think it's something, that unless you're in a position yourself, you probably wouldn't really understand. I have often said I don't think some doctors really understand either the pain, and unless it's very hard to actually describe things. What goes through. And sometimes I think with a condition, people think all of us, you have a condition where you break bones, but there's much more than that. There's a lot of other stuff that goes with it that sometimes people dismiss, so I'd be very loose joints, so potentially would, and they said originally in the description, someone has the condition will be clumsy, but it's actually because they have loose joints, so they're not clumsy because their balance is off. So just simple stuff like that. Yeah. But since I went to college, and then as the years went on, I suppose in many ways I said, look, I wasn't going to give up.
And did you do CIT by night then?
So I went on. Yeah. And got the bug, and found that I was better working by day and college by night. So I started doing really good. Right. And finished the degree. And then there was talk that they were going to have this first taught masters in the evening. So I actually went, and I was on the very first program that they did back in 2007, and actually had that injury in the middle of all of that. Actually, one of the lecturers that had me for the first time, she thought I was always in a wheelchair, and I came in one day, she thought I was after coming from Lourdes or something. So I was in a wheelchair in the class 1 week for 8 weeks. Of course, she never asked me. And the next thing I turn up and I'm walking, she must have thought definitely something's after happening. She I remember her saying to me, I actually thought you were always in a wheelchair. I didn't realise. So I did the masters, and luck plays a big role as well. Happened to get an unbelievable job in Fota. It was a bit of a blank canvas at the time, and that was in 2008. I was actually just doing my thesis for the masters at the time. Got that and made it my own, and I think it was made for me, that position. Had great fun with it. The whole start of the digital revolution began at that point as well, and as a result of my success there, I started doing a lot of guest talks and stuff as well.
Alright.
So then I started seeing all the dots join up, because I said, hold on a second, I belong up here, I like this.
Yeah.
But of course I like this because I had done singing and drama and stuff for years.
Okay.
So I see that as a stage.
Right.
So I'm informing people, but I see it as a stage. So I kind of got more into that over time. Then I became a lecturer, and then the success of that course, there was two of us, myself and Zed, were teaching on that course for the first 2 years. It was so popular that they went away and they decided to create a master's. So I created 2 modules for the master's program, and I suppose it was nice to reflect for someone that started in the Cork Spastic Clinic to end up not alone doing a master's but creating a master's. Who would have thought back then? You know, for a guy that missed 4th class and stuff like that. So no matter how many obstacles are put in your way, there's always a way.
There are opportunities.
There's opportunities.
And
even when I see kids there and they're struggling with their leaving cert, it will work out.
Yes.
You know?
Stick with education. I mean, one of the statistics is like, I think between the age of 15 and 19, 1/3 of the students with disabilities have already left education. So the plea is out, lads, stay in education. It really, it makes a difference to your career.
I've seen a lot of people with my condition over time as well possibly give up.
It's too hard.
You know.
But you need support.
But I see a young generation coming through that I think are hungry, which is good. You know,
and they're in mainstream, and they're getting the supports because of legislation that's come in and everything. So they're getting the supports, but it's just to look for the supports as well. And for parents to look for the supports. You know, and don't be afraid of of being identified with a disability, because there is a lot out there.
And I would think people listening to this podcast, you'll have a lot of parents.
Yes.
And my advice to the parents is sometimes you do have to have a small bit of tough love as well. Because I think back, and my mother and father would have pushed me in terms of physio and stuff, because I was lazy. Didn't want to do it, but kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And that's what got me back up on my feet. And I'm lucky that they did. They could have easily said, should God love them. Yeah,
I think that doesn't work for anyone.
And there are some
sympathy
people
in the tragedy doesn't work.
I see that out there. And they'd nearly put them in a cocoon and they'd wrap them up and they'd be happy enough to keep them in the front room for the rest of their life. And that's not going to help anyone. It's not going to help them.
No.
And it's not going to help the children either.
No.
So I think we do need more of that, whereby people need to encourage. It's not giving out, it's encouraged. There's a difference. There's the kind of like, come on, you can do it.
Yeah, and scaffolding and supporting along the way and pushing on to the next thing,
and bit by bit, not overdoing it, but bit by bit.
Yeah.
And I think, we do need more people in society that are role models. So one of the interesting things that I've come across since I suppose I've told my story is the amount of people privately that have told me their story.
Yes. Yeah. Same here. Yeah.
So, which leads me to believe there's a lot more. Someone said to me before, it's like, it's like a duck, they're floating on the water, but their legs are going 90 underneath. There's a lot of people like that out there that you don't really know. It's not very obvious. There's a lot of invisible conditions out there that nobody knows.
You're dead right. Yeah.
And in some ways, that can be very hard.
Yeah.
From a mental point of view.
Yeah.
From a psychological point of view, it can be very hard because you're treated like everyone else, which is great. But if you're a bit off, or if there's something wrong, people don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the That's the big problem.
But they don't understand it because we don't talk about it.
True.
So we're talking about it now, and we're bringing awareness out there and letting people know that there's all kinds of disability, whether it's visible, that you can see someone in a wheelchair or using a cane, or it's invisible, whether it's sensory, emotional, psychological, you know, sometimes physical, but physical in terms of it's inside the body, not physically
there could be a combination,
visible outside, or a combination, you know. And what I would say as well is stress will make any condition worse, you know. So managing people with disabilities, the advice I give to young people is take ownership of it and then manage it, really look after your wellness and anxiety and all else that comes with disability, the frustrations,
and
etc.
I think companies need more help in this area. I'm not sure that they're fully aware of how to deal with. The bigger organisations are quite good, but the SMEs of the world, I don't know how, unless they're used to dealing with a situation in their own household, I think they're not really sure.
Yeah, what I find funny is when I meet people in organisations and they go, well, we don't really have disability in our organisation, I don't see it. And I'm like, oh, you do. Every organisation has disability, but there's no legal requirement for anyone to disclose their disability, and we don't talk about it. So look, hopefully this podcast will help people get the courage that they need to talk a little bit more and to get what they need to be able to have successful careers, you know?
And it's all bit by bit. More of this type of stuff will help. I think it will help so many people. Well,
Stephen, thank you so much for telling us your story today. It's a very powerful story, and I wish you every success in your upcoming events. I think you have another conference coming up.
I have another conference coming up. I'm all about storytelling.
Yes.
And 24 stories. It's a bit of a network in Cork. Originally, I suppose, for marketeers, but I don't see it just for marketeers. I see it for anyone that has to tell a story for their organisation. So if you're in any type of communication role, possibly even HR, probably works for you as well. So I have people sign up as a member, but then I put on 2 conferences a year. I had my first one, which I was delighted with, back in March in Fort Island. And the next one is coming up on the 13th of September. Lucky for some, they say. It's a Friday the 13th.
Oh, brilliant.
But I said, look, it's why not embrace that? And so that's coming up, and I'll be announcing the speakers in the coming weeks and stuff like that. But you look at that again, all I'm trying to do is educate and inspire people. That's all I'm trying to do, and if I can do that, that's my job done.
Okay.
You know,
I think you can. I think you do inspire people.
So that's what I'm trying.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for all your help, and we're delighted to have you on the couch here today.
Brilliant.
All right. Cheers. Please be advised that this recording does not constitute medical or legal advice.